Greetings and welcome back to 50 Shades of Beige. Well, today we're asking one question. Can we build a PC for the worst timeline? We're going to take this capable budget tier AM4 selection, give it 16 gigs of laptop RAM, 11 potato SSDs, 2 RAID arrays, and a GPU from the ray tracing hype era. Before we get started, let's take a quick look at our parts list, because every component here has a story, and most of them end with, well, that technically works, which, I mean, if I'm being honest, that's my specialty.
Yeah, boy.
First up is the CPU. We have a Ryzen 5 3500X. It has 6 cores, 6 threads, and turbos up to 4.1 gigahertz, but it doesn't have SMT. Now, this is basically a cut-down R5 3600 that was released into the OEM and Chinese domestic market to compete with the Intel 9400F. It features a Zen 2 chiplet with a full complement of cache and PCIe lanes, unlike some of the other budget Ryzen CPUs. I'm looking at you, Ryzen 5 4500. The key note here is you can pick these things up brand new, sealed in a box for between $40 and $50 on AliExpress, and it's kneecapped just enough to make our bad decisions shine through just a little bit. Next up is the motherboard. This is the MSI Pro B550-VC. It's probably the most mediocre B550 board on the planet. It's got all the standard features, a normal-ish offering for people trying to do, I don't know, daily gaming things. But the key for tonight's build is that it's got enough PCIe expansion to support our storage selection, which we're going to get into shortly. Now let's talk about RAM. Instead of using normal desktop DDR4, we are using a DDR4 to SO-DIMM adapter. Now, this is mostly because we had a question from subscriber the Beowulf. He wanted to see if these things actually worked or not. And these adapters are useful for testing laptop memory, reusing parts, or making your motherboard look like it lost a bet. It's the we're on the worst timeline ever, and RAM is stupid expensive play. So we're going to lean into it and see how we do. Next, we have storage, and this is where the build stops being a little weird and starts becoming paperwork. I have 10 64 gig SanDisk Z400 SSDs. Now, obviously, these were not made for high-end gaming rigs. This isn't even a SATA SSD from a time when SATA still ruled the world. No. These are for ATMs, kiosks, point-of-sale machines, digital signage, basically computers that boot and do one job, and then they spend the rest of their lives bolted to a wall until they hit the trash pile, which is where we get our grubby little fingers on them. Now, according to the datasheet, this 64 gig model has decent read performance, but the write speeds are questionable. And this is fine if you're running an ATM. It's less fine if you're running games with heavy I/O needs. I'm interested in these mostly because I was able to get them in bulk for about $4 each. That gives us a little more than half a gig of storage for $40, which is considerably less, about less than half the price of your average 512 gig SSD on Amazon US right now. So naturally, we're going to go ahead and put 2 of these in a RAID array for a boot drive, and then we're going to take 8 more for game storage, because when one tiny SSD is questionable, 10 of them becomes an infrastructure decision. Okay, now in order to make this whole thing work, we're relying on this beautiful PCIe card from JE. Now you might be thinking to yourself, gee, Shades, that's a lot of M.2 ports, and you'd be right. There are 9 of them in total, and that'll tie into the chip that we're using down here. We're working with a RTL 9101 PCIe to SATA chip from Realtek. This is a little nicer than the average PCIe to SATA expansion card that you'd find on Amazon for sure. Now, JE is really proud of the fact that this card can use PCIe 5.0, but the fact is you don't need PCIe 5.0. In reality, all PCIe cards are backward and forward compatible. So if you're worried about motherboard compatibility due to the PCI revision, don't. Now, this chip utilizes 2 PCIe 3.0 lanes, which gives us a maximum theoretical throughput of about 1900 megabytes per second. This card does support all the standard SATA things like sequential spin up and so on, but there's no onboard BIOS or anything like that. So hardware RAID is out of the question. What we're really trying to determine is the throughput on this system with overhead and everything taken into account. You can find this JE card and other similar cards to it on Amazon or AliExpress for between $40 and $80. But nevertheless, we are here, and I'm happy to be the guinea pig today. Now, some of you might notice this also looks similar to a card that I've shown you in the past. Mine is PCIe, though. Mine is M.2 NVMe, not just NGFF SATA. And speaking of SATA, another important detail, we are using two of these cards here. These are NVMe to PCIe adapters. These are from a time when a lot of people were sort of coming over from M.2 SATA or regular SATA onto NVMe. So there may have been a situation where you wanted both. So there was like a sweet spot, I'd say in around 2017, 2018, where a lot of these cards were on Amazon. You could get them pretty cheap. I happened to have this one just kind of hanging out. So I figured, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and pull this thing out and we'll run our cards here off the SATA M.2, right? So you just pop your guy in there and then the data comes out of the SATA data port there. You might be thinking to yourself, well, Shades, why are you even bothering with that? Why not use the native M.2 ports on the motherboard? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Let's go ahead and hop into the nuances there. If you want to fast forward through this, I'll go ahead and put a timestamp down below. It takes a couple of minutes to explain, but I definitely want to talk about it because this is the difference between like one of my, you know, whatever YouTuber type videos and something that I feel like the community might actually find interesting and useful. So let's go ahead and hop into it. Okay, we'll have a quick look at the motherboard manual for our MSI Pro B550-VC, blah, 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 right? And this is all stuff you've seen before, but if we scroll down to page 26, all right, so we'll take a look here at the block diagram. So you got your M.2-1. Sorry, I'm not as good as Buildzoid at this. This runs off the CPU. A PCIe E1 also runs off the CPU. You're good there, right? Then you look down here, we've got E2, E3, M.2-2, and PCIe 4. All of this stuff here, all of this goes to the chipset right here, okay? And so these are kind of a shared by-4 connection back up to the CPU. So you get more expansion, you get more things. The chipset can handle a lot of the I/O and that sort of stuff. And then here's where it gets a little wild. So we'll look down here at this combination table. So this is kind of breaking down your M.2-1, once again, off the CPU. It says it runs PCIe and SATA. It says M.2-2 from the PCH, mind you, so that's the chipset. Only does PCIe by 4. That's it. That's all it's got. No SATA support here. Wrong. Doesn't exist. I hear you thinking, well, Shades, how can we have SATA support for M.2 off the CPU, but not off the M.2 that runs off the chipset when the chipset's got the SATA controller, right? Well, if we take a look at the Ryzen 5 3500X product page, obviously we don't get much, and that's probably just the result of the OEM-only support for that chip. But if we look over here at the 5600 and we look down, you'll see actually all these CPUs, all of them that I've looked up so far anyway, all have 2 native SATA ports. So just kind of an interesting factoid. Now this whole thing is ultimately a decision that MSI makes when they're, you know, doing their traces and their layouts. Now, I've done my fair share of PCB design in my day, although I'll admit I have never designed an ATX motherboard and gone to market with it, right? So there might be a reason, a very good reason why MSI does it this way. But I did want to clarify that this could be a problem, especially if you are trying to do storage on a budget in 2026 in these unprecedented times. Maybe you got an old SATA drive laying around or something like that. Double check your motherboard configuration before you plug your SATA drive into one of these ports and assume that you killed it and or it's dead. Because if you search this up on Reddit, you'll get a bunch of clowns telling you, oh, the M.2 port for NVMe is electronically incompatible.
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
But yeah, just something to take note of, because you could get a false positive. You pull your old drive out, you go to pop it in, maybe you're going to store some games on it, maybe you're going to do some fun things with it, I don't know. And you plug it in, you go, oh, that's weird, the computer won't read it. My drive must be dead. It's not dead. It's not dead. Chances are this is just only wired up for PCIe only with no SATA support, despite the fact that it's running through the chipset, which has a SATA controller on board. Finally, we have the GPU. This is the Gigabyte Gaming 2080 Super. Shout out to King Zalant for sending that out. It's a former high-end gaming card from the touring era. It's got 8 gigs of GDDR6 and technically has ray tracing support. It's definitely a little weak when it comes to the ray tracing, but we also have DLSS, so for those of you who are connoisseurs of fake frames, it's enough performance to still be useful, but not old enough that anybody is pretending it's the future anymore. I really like these 20 series cards. The pricing is really good on eBay right now. You can pick up a 2080 Super for less than 200 bucks if you do some digging. All right, so we've got our JE card up on an Oculink adapter. That's because I basically ran out of space. And then I've got our 2 SATA drives running off of a hardware RAID array that we're gonna set up right now. And it looks like everything powered on nicely. We even have some bonus RGB.
This one. Flash. And wait for it. Nothing for a while. Here it comes. Double flash.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and set up our RAID array in BIOS. That's a pretty normal process. If you need help with that, just look it up online. And then also one thing to note, you're gonna need the AMD preload drivers for Windows so that Windows can actually see your RAID array and install to it. All right, now that we're done setting up tinyTen, I went ahead and installed the chipset drivers and all that fun stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and get our RAID array. Once again, this is just a software array, but I went ahead and named it RAID Shadow Legends because, I don't know, why not? Now, before we get into the gaming, I did want to go ahead and try CrystalDiskMark. We're just gonna check it on our C drive, which is our AMD hardware RAID array. The reads definitely much better, way better than the writes. And we were kind of expecting those results. So not great, probably, fast enough for the reads. And that's really what you're worried about with gaming, less than the writes. So sure. So here we go. We've got our RAID Shadow Legends volume here. And I just went ahead and picked, flash memory, and we'll do real world performance. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. I know there may be more ideal ways to set up this benchmark. If you want to leave it down in the comments, if you're a CrystalDiskMark wizard, let me know, but this seems to be reasonable for what we're trying to do here. All right, 1491, 1501, all right, not bad. Only 700 on the writes. That's, all things considered, not too bad. I mean, compared to the hardware array, we're definitely faster for what it's worth, especially considering, we don't have much in the way of CPU power here. Can we game on it? Probably. Let's go ahead and try a few games out and see how we do. All right, and kicking things off with Battlefield 6 because it's CPU intensive. One thing I noticed, the shaders being compiled definitely took a little while longer than planned. Wowzer. I mean, our CPU is part of the problem. If you take a look at the top of the screen, you'll notice that we are tracking total activity, read rate, and write rate. That's specifically for our OS drive, our AMD RAID array, not the software striped array. Unfortunately, Hardware Info just has a hard time tracking that, so storage telemetry is imperfect here, but the gameplay result is still valid. This is what the finished system feels like, not a lab-grade storage paper. And we're going to go ahead and kick things off at 1080p high with no resolution scaling and a casual breakthrough. It's not good. Not good at all. This is borderline unplayable. It says 30 FPS. It feels worse. So we'll go ahead and dial things back to 1080p medium this time. Let's see if that kind of takes the load off or not. My guess is probably not, but let's see. And it's, I guess, I don't know, slightly better, maybe. I mean, this is a slower part of the map, so I would expect better frame rates. Yeah, still not loving life in the busy section, still hanging around 35 to 40 FPS at the most. I think we popped up to 45 a couple times. Either way, I feel like if you're going to play Battlefield 6 on this CPU, you're going to have a bad time. Do not recommend, even on low. And of course, we had to spread some democracy with our new system. Went ahead and hopped into Helldivers 2. This is at 1080p Ultra with resolution scaling set at 100. Our 2080 Super had a fine time. It looks like we were pretty much bottlenecked by the CPU once again. Now we are running off the C drive this time, so we don't have a ton of CPU or OS overhead on our striped array. This is just the hardware striped array running off the chipset. Still not doing great though. The 3500X just can't quite cut it. It's so close, yet so far. I saw large variations anywhere from 20 FPS all the way up to 55 or 60 FPS, depending on where I was at on the map. And that was over the course of about an hour and a half of gameplay. So close but no cigar. I did dial back the settings a little bit on 1080p medium. Things did stabilize a little bit. We ran into like the 45, 50 FPS range, but definitely the 3500X just can't quite keep up here. And next up we have American Trucker Simulator. This is by request of our good friend and longtime member of the council, David Starbuck. Went ahead and just kicked things off at the 1080p Ultra preset, but then I dialed back the scaling from 400% down to just 100%. Not terrible performance, definitely seen worse. I like where we're at here, and clearly the I/O is not a problem in ATS. Next up we gave Arc Raiders a try. Now this is one of those titles that pretty much runs on everything. I did notice our CPU was pretty stressed through multiple points during my time playing. Now, since we were averaging around 60 FPS, I went ahead and cranked the graphics up a little bit higher. We went from 1080p medium with 100% resolution scaling up to 1080p high, and that's where things started to get a little rougher. It's really tough to truly benchmark Arc Raiders because depending on what's going on in the environment, your results may vary. Overall, it's more than playable, and you're going to have a good time with this game. That's, once again, to be expected. This thing can run on a potato. And of course, we can't wrap things up without trying at least one real indie game. This is Birds of War. It's my favorite PvP third-person airborne poultry combat simulator. There is some weird kind of bug going on with the screen resolution that needs to be figured out. But overall, the game ran fine, and I had a good time messing around with this thing. And it just launched on Steam for $8, so if you want to support a real indie game, go check it out. And lastly, we went ahead and tried Windrose. Started out at 1080p high with the resolution scaling at 100%. Once again, the 3500X just seems to be holding us up. Now, our software striped RAID array across 9 drives probably isn't helping that situation. But that being said, I went ahead and just turned everything down a little bit, turned DLSS on just to see what would happen. We gained about 10 FPS, which was kind of nice. But then as I continued to play, I saw more and more frame spikes and that sort of thing. Clearly, we're in a situation where, yeah, in some states we may be GPU limited, but we're really CPU limited at the end of the day. And that's ultimately where I found myself after testing for several hours. This setup is not great. It's certainly fine for playing, games made before, say, 2022. You're probably going to be all right. For new, modern AAA titles, you're going to have a bad time. The 3500X just can't cut it. Moreover, our storage setup is just, we'll say less than ideal for gaming. That being said, if you want to see me push this array to the max, or even the 3500X for that matter, be sure to let me know down in the comments and smash like, subscribe, guys. I've got lots more content on the way, but in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see ya soon.